Lord, I pray the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts may be truly acceptable to you this day. In Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen. The crowds had gone. Jesus had been in Galilee for a while now, speaking, healing, and calling his disciples to follow him. We saw that last week's readings. The leaders from Jerusalem certainly had their spies keeping an eye on him. But with the crowds that Jesus was now gathering, all they could do right now was watch and listen. So that's what they were doing. Wherever Jesus went, there were always a few Pharisees and Sadducees in the crowd looking for things he might do or say that they could use against him when they did finally get a chance. And his disciples would occasionally remind him of the risk, and they seemed confused when he didn't seem to care. It was almost like he was intentionally trying to make them angry, and it's almost like that in today's reading. Today Jesus was walking along the road just a couple of k's out of west of Capernaum and where he was now living. Along with his disciples, there was a large crowd of people following him, and more coming down the road from all directions. So Jesus looked for a spot open enough to hold everyone and found a place to sit down. Jesus watched as the crowd gathered around him. There were fishermen, farmers, orchardists, shopkeepers, mothers, children and others. Pharisees and Sadducees from Jerusalem were there as well. And Jesus began to speak. But unfortunately, many of us have never really heard what he said that day. Matthew wrote about it, Luke wrote about it. We've read what they wrote and have even given part of his message that day a title of its own. And we call that part the Beatitudes. And you've probably heard many sermons about the Beatitudes. We hear a lot about the Beatitudes. But I wonder if many of us have actually heard what it was that Jesus said. Because most of the time we get distracted and end up talking or debating other things. For example, Matthew told us that Jesus and the group were on a mountain when he spoke these words. Luke said they were on a flat plain somewhere. And someone usually points out there really weren't any mountains in that area. So we debate. Where were they? Was Matthew correct or was Luke? Can we say that one gospel writer was wrong and the other was? And we get distracted. And then somebody will sometimes point out that Matthew writes about 8 Beatitudes and Luke only 4. What do we do with that? And then we find some historians who argue that Jesus didn't speak the Beatitudes on a mountain or a plain, but they were part of what he spoke on the day that he sat in a boat and spoke to the crowds gathered on the shore. And while those things might make great subjects for seminary theological classes, it seems to me that most of the time they are just distractions. We don't debate back and forth about these questions and end up just glancing at what Jesus actually saying that day. And I don't think it really matters where he said it, whether on a mountain, on a plain, on the dock at Josiah's boat and tackle shop. It doesn't change what he said. So just for a few minutes, I'd like to see if we can tune out those distractions and hear the Beatitudes. But before we begin, I need to warn you that this could be difficult. It's not difficult to understand what Jesus is saying. That's not difficult at all. Jesus made simple things that others made complex. And he was good at explaining them in ways that made them clear for the uneducated crowd around him to understand. That's not what makes it difficult. Not understanding what Jesus is saying, but actually trying to figure out what we're going to do with it after we understand. And sometimes it's going to be difficult. And that's why we're going to spend so much time focusing. But that's why we spend so much time focusing on distractions rather than what he said. Because distractions are a powerful thing. Politicians use them to keep us from paying attention to more important things. Armies use it to cause their enemies to look in one direction while they build an attack from another. Marketeers use distractions to keep us from paying attention to the reasons why we might not buy their product or their philosophy. Distractions keep us from having to deal with the hard questions. And if a preacher can preach a sermon about whether Jesus was on a mountain or a plain, we don't have to worry about the sermon saying something that might really put us in a difficult position. So you've been warned. This may become difficult at times, and I hope it does. Jesus sat down, which is what teachers did when they were going to say something really important. The crowd grew quiet and everyone leaned forward to catch every word. Then he began. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You know, that wouldn't take long for them because everyone there got it much quicker than we do today. They knew poor in spirit. And when Jesus said that, most of the crowd, you could almost see, turn and glance at that little group of Pharisees and Sadducees. Those guys defined rich in spirit. Because poor in spirit wasn't about talking about money. It was about a spirit that doesn't become proud. The Pharisees and Sadducees stood out from the crowd because of their fancy robes, stoles, big hats and jewels and tassels on them. They were proud of their faith because they knew that their faith was the right faith and that meant that they were right. But their spirits were anything but poor. And they caught what Jesus was saying, as well as the looks from the crowd. And they would have made notes in their little book. And in this comment, and the others that followed, Jesus was making a clear point. He's giving this crowd a list. He's telling them the 8 things you need to do if you want to follow him. And each one of the 8 things is simple. And together they spoke a very simple message. If you want to follow me, you do things differently, different from the old ways. Different from those guys over there with their fancy robes and hats. If you want to follow Jesus, you have to be different. And first of all, if you are following Jesus, don't ever get the idea that it's something to boast or show off about. You know, I have to be honest and admit that sometimes when I remember this one, I look around and see what sometimes we do. I wonder. I look at our buildings, our sanctuaries, the things that might be seen as our robes and the fancy stuff. And I have to pause and remind myself, if we are using these things to communicate Jesus' message in the best way to people that we can, we're probably okay. But if we ever get proud about these things or that we deserve these things, I think we may be in a bit of trouble. Others may boast. We have to be different. I wonder whether you can see the impact that was having on those Pharisees there. And Jesus continues, blessed are those who mourn. Now, everyone mourns at some point, even the Pharisees and Sadducees. We mourn at the loss of someone we care for, or for some harm that comes to someone we care about. But Jesus wasn't talking about just those people. Blessed are those who look at the world in the condition it is in now, and they mourn. They don't just emphasise enough to send a nice card and flowers, but their heart aches at how some people are being treated. Even people that they don't know and never meet, they will mourn. They are blessed. Blessed are the meek. And this is a tough one for our culture. We respond by insisting that businesses and nations are not created through meekness, but through determination and strength. And we end up getting distracted and arguing about whether or not Jesus was pro-business, or debating whether or not the amount of wealth or property controlled by the church today disqualifies them from being meek. But you know, Jesus isn't talking about money and property here. He's not saying that if you want to follow him, you need to be a wimp. He's talking about humility. You may be wealthy, or poor. You may be have great power, or very little. Whatever you are, be humble. Never consider yourself to be of more value than someone else, regardless of any circumstances. And having humility means, no matter what, never seeking vengeance. You know, the Pharisees, in essence, wrote the book on vengeance. Jesus was saying to be different than the Pharisees and Sadducees, and they would have noted that too. You know, in my imagination, it was at this point that Jesus noticed some movement in that crowd. Many of them had come a long way and started over really early that morning to get there. They were quite a distance from town, and some of the group were clearly getting hungry and thirsty. And in my mind, one of the Pharisees opens a bag of one of his aides that picked up at Tiberius's coffee shop and pulled out a nice scone and started to munch on it while he sipped his caramel latte. And Jesus looked at them and said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness." You know, righteousness is not the same as being right. However right the Pharisees might have been in enforcing the old laws, they were the exact opposite of righteousness. Righteousness means justice. And Jesus was saying that you can create as many laws as you want, but if they're not founded in justice for everyone, it can never be considered righteous. And the Pharisees were a perfect example of what it meant to be people of faith. I'm betting that Jesus was looking at them when he told the group that if they wanted to follow him, they needed to be almost the exact opposite. That Pharisee was choking on his scone. Blessed are the merciful. I think Jesus was asking that when we look around at other people, do we see them through our own eyes, or do we try to see them through their eyes and try to understand who they are and why they are where they are? Do you hold people to a standard that fits your views of the world and how you were raised? Or do you try to understand why they might appear to have a different standard? And when you absolutely disagree with someone's views or actions, do you write them off or go on the attack? Or do you try to understand that person is just a human being with a different opinion than your own? And when someone clearly makes a mistake, do you define them by that mistake? Or try to understand what led to it happening and try to understand there is more to that person than one mistake? You know, the Pharisees lived in a simple world. You either agreed with them and followed the laws and were right, or you broke the laws and were wrong. But Jesus said they had to be different. Blessed are the pure in heart. Jesus knew that no one in that crowd was pure. He knew that even those who made mistakes could have the very best of intentions. They could be pure of heart, because we all of us make honest mistakes. But some, once again giving a nod to the Pharisees and Sadducees, some are never quite what they present themselves to be. They approach you as a friend and watch for ways to attack you. They speak of justice and love and then pounce on you when you slip up. They talk about God's love and then angrily attack you when you disagree with their point of view. You know, some people are always planning and plotting. Everything they do is a step to position themselves for some next step on their list. They may truly care about someone or something, but there are reasons. They may have a heart of compassion, but that compassion is there to help them achieve something else. You know, this is a little bit like the loyal, devout old gentleman who hasn't missed a Sunday service in 47 years, who gives more than his tithe, who offers his smile and prayer freely and openly, but is not necessarily pure. He expects something in return. It might be to have a louder voice in the decision-making process at the church. It may be as just that he believes his actions are securing him a ticket through those pearly gates. That's when the day comes. He's not offering his heart purely, but in a way that the Pharisees offered theirs. I love you, therefore. Jesus said you have to be different. Blessed are the peacemakers. No, we think, finally I can deal with that. We realise that when we talk about peace, we might be talking about peace between countries or peace between people in towns or even peace in our own families. But regardless of that, we say we're all supportive of peace. We try to get along with people. We go out of our way to even be polite to those we had arguments with years ago. We don't go and hang out together, but if we happen to bump into each other at church or something, we're polite about it. We support peace. But you know, Jesus didn't say, blessed are those who support peace. He said, blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those who do the things that are required to create peace, to bring peace where there is no peace now. Blessed are those who make peace happen. You can hear the distractions creep in there. You can say, but I'm just here where I live. I don't have the power to make countries quit fighting. I'll vote for the person who I think might do that, but what else can I do? Well, my hunch is that there are still a few opportunities for peacemaking within our own reach, such as broken relationships. And remember, Jesus didn't say we're blessed if we do our best to be polite, or if we say that we'll stop calling the other person names, or if we accept their apology if and when they offer it. Jesus said, blessed are those who do make peace happen. Blessed are those who don't just hope for it or wait for someone else to offer it, but those who get up in the morning and spend their day making peace happen. I think by that point the Pharisees and Sadducees would have been a little bit upset with Jesus, and it would have showed in them, and it would have scared the crowd. At first all looked at the Pharisees and Sadducees and smiled when Jesus said something, but I think by now they would have been a little bit afraid to look. One of the Pharisees might remember your face later, and that wouldn't be a good thing. And I think Jesus noticed, because he goes on to say, Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You know, Jesus knew what the crowd was thinking. If they were to actually did the things he was telling them to do, if they were really going to be as different as he said they needed to be, then they were going to end up in heaps of trouble. Even way up there in Galilee, if you went against the temple leaders long enough, they would find out and come and get you. You could be arrested, you could lose your home, your business, you could even end up being crucified. You know, if Jesus had a modern day public relations person among his disciples, I would have probably suggested that Jesus speak this last one really fast, like those things at the end of drug commercials on TV. Yes, they would be persecuted, and we really ought to warn them. But tell them so really quickly so it doesn't spoil the effect of everything else you've said. You know, that PR guy would have recommended using a distraction. But Jesus kept it simple. And that is why it is so difficult. You know, being a follower of Jesus of Nazareth is not a difficult thing to understand. We talk about it. We write a lot about it. We create lots of extra activities and traditions that we say are part of being a follower of, or at least the things we think followers ought to do. But as Jesus presented at that day, whatever the heck it was not complicated. Yet following Jesus might be the most difficult thing that we ever try to do. But don't let anybody tell you it's complicated. But I have to tell you, it is worth it. God bless.
Amen.